She's always stayed hidden, but tonight she finally speaks. Steven Seagal's daughter just broke years of silence, and what she said is changing everything. You have to understand what it means to be a legend. It's not about the championships or the money. Not really. It's about the air you displace when you walk into a room. For 20 years, Randy Orton has been the Viper, and that name carries a chill that's more real than any pyrotechnic display. Backstage, you don't just see him coming, you feel him. It's a quiet drop in temperature, a sudden awareness that a predator is nearby. We, the people behind the curtain, saw the work that went into that. The thousands of hours of becoming something else. Something cold, precise, and patient. The persona isn't just a costume he puts on. It's a psychological space he has to inhabit. And living in that space, year after year, comes at a cost. Fans see the methodical attack, the RKO that comes from nowhere. They don't see the immense, crushing pressure of being that perfect, that controlled all the time. They don't feel the slow burn of containing a storm inside you because the character demands it. He carries 2 decades of every superstar he's retired, every betrayal he's enacted, every chilling promise he's delivered. That's not just a story arc, it's a weight. And sometimes you could see it in his eyes right before the curtain rose, a flicker of the man wondering how much longer he could hold it all together. The silence backstage before his music hits is heavier than you can imagine. Then there was Drew McIntyre. If Orton was the creeping frost, Drew was the forge fire. He was everything the Viper wasn't. Loud, passionate, wearing his heart on his sleeve for the world to see. He embodied the hero's struggle, the comeback story that fans crave because it feels earned and honest. He was pure, kinetic energy. When the two were scheduled to face each other, the tension backstage wasn't about competition. It was philosophical. It was a clash of realities. Drew would prepare by feeding off the energy of the building, his presence growing with the noise. He'd pace, his movements full of raw, uncontained power. Orton, on the other hand, would retreat inward. He'd become stiller, quieter. The world would shrink until it was just him and the snake he had to become. We watched this ritual play out on the monitors in the gorilla position. It was a study in contrasts. Fire and ice, the roaring warrior and the silent assassin. We all knew the performance would be incredible, a masterclass in storytelling. What we didn't know was that the performance had already become too real. The lines had been blurring for months. The story they were telling in the ring was starting to mirror the silent, unseen tension between 2 men at the absolute peak of their professions, each refusing to give an inch of ground, not to the other man, but to the characters they were sworn to portray. The match began exactly as you'd expect. Methodical, psychological. Every move was a sentence in a larger story. Orton was the patient hunter, circling, his eyes fixed on Drew with an unnerving stillness. Drew was the proud champion, meeting that coldness with explosive bursts of offense. From the outside, it was perfect. The crowd was living and dying with every moment. But for those of us who knew what to look for, something was different. The silence between the moves was longer. The stares they exchanged held a little less performance and a little more friction. You could feel it through the screen. It was in the way Orton slid into the ring, not with the fluid grace of a showman, but with the grim economy of someone who had a job to do. There's a hum in a live arena, a constant buzz of thousands of people. But in that ring, it felt like a vacuum. We weren't just watching a wrestling match. We were watching a finely tuned machine, the character of the Viper being tested against a force of pure, unfiltered will. The crowd reacted to the slams and the near falls, but the real story was happening in the spaces between, in the tightening of a fist that wasn't for the camera, in the hard, unblinking stare that lingered a second too long. The performance was flawless, but it was a flawless sheet of ice over a deep, dark, and turbulent ocean. And then it happened. It wasn't a botched move, it wasn't a mistake, it was a sound. During a furious exchange, a strike from Drew landed with a crack that was different from the performed sounds we were used to. It was sharp, ugly, and real. For a split second, the rhythm of the match just stopped. It was an intake of breath that the entire arena felt but couldn't identify. Drew hesitated. It was almost imperceptible. A flicker in his eyes, a momentary pause before his next movement. He was processing what had just happened. Was that planned? Was that real? That tiny, human moment of hesitation was the only invitation needed. In that instant, the carefully constructed world of the performance shattered. Backstage, we all saw it. The producers, the writers, the other wrestlers waiting for their turn. Everyone leaned closer to the monitors. A low murmur went through the production headset. The match was no longer just the match. It had become an event, live and unscripted. The energy shifted from entertainment to something far more volatile. The air didn't just change, it became heavy, charged with a sudden and terrifying authenticity. The story had just been thrown away, and two men were now standing in the middle of the ring with no script to guide them. Everything that happened next was a study in pure, unadulterated anger. The character of the Viper is supposed to be cold, devoid of emotion. But what we saw wasn't cold. It was white-hot. The mask didn't just slip, it was incinerated. You could see the transformation in Orton's body language. The calculated, serpentine movements were gone. He moved with a rigid, furious purpose. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw locked. It was the physiology of a man whose professional composure had been breached. The anger became real. It radiated from him. Fans at home might have thought it was brilliant selling, a master at work. But we knew better. We could see the difference. The performance was over. What stood in the ring was Randy Orton, a man who had spent a career perfecting control, now visibly losing it in front of 15,000 people and millions more at home. His eyes were the most telling. They weren't the empty, predatory eyes of the Viper. They were narrowed, focused, and burning with a raw fury that no script could ever dictate. The silence in the gorilla position was absolute. We were watching a man, a legend, come undone in real time. It was terrifying. It was mesmerizing. It was the moment everyone who knew him had quietly wondered about but never thought they'd actually see. The confusion spread like a contagion. The referee, a veteran of thousands of matches, suddenly looked lost. You could see him in the background, his eyes darting from Orton to Drew, trying to read a situation that no longer had any rules. His job was to maintain order, but the order had just evaporated. He was no longer officiating a match. He was trying to manage a potential crisis. Drew, for his part, had to make an impossible choice. Does he press the advantage? Does he back off? Does he try to bring the match back to the story they were supposed to be telling? His expression was a mixture of defiance and genuine concern. He was a performer trapped in a scene where his partner had thrown the script into the fire. The reaction backstage was just as chaotic. Agents were talking into their headsets, their voices low and urgent. Is he okay? What's the call? Someone get in the ref's ear. But there was no call to make. This was beyond direction. Everyone was a spectator now, watching the raw, unfiltered consequences of a single moment. We were all seeing the fine line between performance and reality not just being blurred, but being erased with a vengeance. The carefully managed world of professional wrestling had just been hijacked by one of its most disciplined practitioners, and nobody knew where it was going. They finished the match. To their credit as professionals, they brought it home. But the texture was all wrong. The story they had so carefully built over weeks of television was gone, replaced by something far more primal. Every move from that point on felt heavier. Every strike landed with more intent. The performance returned, but it was now fueled by the real anger that had been exposed. It was like watching two incredible dancers who had forgotten the choreography and were now improvising, their movements dictated by instinct and adrenaline. The crowd felt it, even if they didn't understand it. The roar of the arena changed. It was less about cheering for a hero or booing a villain, and more a collective gasp at the raw spectacle unfolding. They knew they were seeing something special, something that couldn't be rehearsed. Watching them navigate that minefield was one of the most incredible things I've ever witnessed. They were protecting each other while simultaneously wrestling with a real, volatile energy. They were both actor and director, trying to find an ending to a play that had gone completely off the rails. When the final bell rang, the sense of relief backstage was palpable. It wasn't about who won or lost. It was about survival. They had pulled the plane out of a nosedive, but everyone knew the damage had been done. The illusion was broken. The moments after a main event are usually a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Cheers, congratulations, producers giving feedback. But that night, there was only silence. When Orton and Drew came through the curtain, the crowd of people parted instinctively. No one made eye contact with them. No one slapped them on the back. The air was thick with unspoken questions. They didn't speak to each other. They didn't even look at each other. They walked their separate ways down the hall, each disappearing into a private locker room. The sound of their doors closing, one after the other, was like two final definitive gunshots. That was the real aftermath. Not the replays or the online debates, but the profound and heavy silence of 100 people pretending they hadn't just seen what they saw. It was a shared secret, an acknowledgement that the curtain had been pulled back for a moment, revealing something intensely personal and uncomfortable. The fans would talk for years about the intensity of that match, about the realism of the performances. They would never know that the most powerful part of the story happened in a quiet hallway, where two men had to privately reckon with the moment a character they played became indistinguishable from the men they were. In the days that followed, the incident was never officially addressed. It was absorbed into the mythology. It became another chapter in the legend of the Viper, a story fans would tell to prove how committed he was, how dangerous he could be. But they missed the point entirely. What happened in that ring wasn't about a character, it was about the man who has to carry him. It was about the psychological toll of embodying a predator for 20 years. Imagine the discipline it takes to contain your own frustrations, your own ego, your own anger, and channel it into a quiet, cold-blooded persona, night after night. That pressure has to go somewhere. It builds over time, a slow, imperceptible rise in temperature. The moment with Drew wasn't an anomaly. It was an inevitability. It was the result of 2 decades of suppressed humanity finally boiling over. It wasn't a loss of professionalism. It was a moment of profound, painful honesty. He didn't lash out because he was a villain. He lashed out because he was a human being who had spent half his life perfecting the art of not appearing to be one. The anger that built behind the legend wasn't just a gimmick. It was real. And for one night, the entire world got to see it even if they didn't understand what they were looking at. Fame creates monsters and heroes, but it's built on the backs of people. We forget that. We see the larger-than-life figures, the legends, and we assume they are as unbreakable as the stories we tell about them. We want to believe that the control is absolute, that the performance is everything. But it isn't. Behind every carefully crafted persona is a person, subject to the same pressures, the same emotions, the same breaking points as anyone else. That night became a story that fans will never forget, a piece of wrestling lore debated in forums and on podcasts. They analyze the moves, the expressions, the outcome, but the real story, the one that stays with those of us who were there, is quieter. It's not about a slip-up or a moment of anger. It's about the staggering, almost impossible weight of being a legend in a world that demands you never show weakness. It's a story about the cost of greatness, measured in the silent moments when the cameras are off. And it stands as a quiet, emotional reflection, a reminder that even legends are human and sometimes the mask cracks.